Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. I think we've got a quorum here. My name is Mark Riley. I work for Oxford Computer Group, and today we're going to talk about service accounts and what we can do to help secure our service accounts a little better. We've done a bit of work in this, and some of the things we want to talk about, right? I don't want to do too many of these scary slides, but I do want to just, why are we interested in this? Service accounts can be really risky, right? Passwords are shared, written down, right, always. They're a great phishing target if you can pick this up because people don't monitor them as much, right? And the fact that it's hard to change passwords means passwords often don't change. The fear of killing a bunch of services if you forget to change your password in one of the locations it's being used or one of the applications it uses it can be really difficult. So people tend to leave them alone. And we know rotating passwords isn't a perfect solution, but getting rid of passwords is really what we're after here, right? These accounts tend to have elevated rights, right? Most people who build apps don't tend to work real hard to get to least privilege. A lot of work is done to install these, and sometimes you just go ahead and do the setup with the higher rights because it's easier, and then they don't get back down after the fact, and they just kind of get left. Now, these accounts can be used to move laterally through an infrastructure, so they are of concern for that, right? So limitations within them that make them easier to use for that, and we tend not to manage them as well, and that's a problem we want to address. So today we're going to talk about kind of the traditional approach to protection, which has not been much. More modern approaches to protection, talk about those benefits and some issues and solutions that we've seen as we've gone through this, doing this work for people. So when we talk about the classic service accounts, right, management was kind of governed by this bastion sense of, oh, well, it's behind the firewall, it's fine, has access within the domain, but that's all, we don't have to worry about that. And of course, those days have passed, right? We're using things from outside the organization. It's really important to make sure that you're not allowing service accounts to come in from outside the organization, right? The perceived risk and the just sheer requirement for these services indicates there's a broad spread of service accounts. When we've done work with customers on this, we've seen ratios as high as 3 to 1 of service accounts to what we call belly button or person accounts that are actually associated with a single user. The account we all use to log on, the account that uses MFA, those kinds of things. Those are what we call person accounts, belly button accounts, whatever. But really, nobody knows exactly how many you've got because discovery can be an issue. And service accounts running out on independent systems, not really any safer because once they get into the system, then they can start laterally transferring, picking up an account and crossing over, right? We know all those risks. And as I said before, permissions run amok. I mean, I've installed services over the past 30 years. How many of them require domain admin to get the thing set up? And we can't even secure these passwords with MFA. That's what we do right now to secure passwords that people use. And we can't do that with MFA because obviously there's no person involved when we're working with these service accounts. One approach to go after this is what either, depends where you look, either Carnegie or Mark Twain said, put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket, right? The old adage, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And one approach is to say, okay, let's just gather all this stuff together, protect that service account password through some message, whether it's vaulting, where I have to go and check out the password so that I can put it in more of a privileged identity scenario than the service account. But for service accounts, we tend to rely on things, password management, rotation. Someone uses the account at a certain period of time, we go out and rotate those. This is a good approach, and in a particularly centralized domain arrangement work pretty well. You get centralized management out of it. It works well with most legacy solutions, not all, but most. Implementation time, relatively short. You're just gathering up these service accounts that you're aware of and putting them under management. And it's a good transition as we move away from these classic service accounts, which is really what I think the goal should be. The downsides of this is passwords are still out there. There's still a weak point. You probably have some places where they're going to be exposed, and we really want to get rid of that, right? Multiple points of failure. If I don't manage to update the password for a service account running on one machine, then I can start to have login failures for that service, and I have to go figure out what all that is. If I have to go get these passwords and we just don't keep them in a spreadsheet, whatever we used to do with them, then all the IT pros have to change their workflow, and we have new mechanisms. And these costs can add up over time running these services. Some of these PAM solutions, privileged identity management, privileged access management, some of these solutions require agents on devices, which can really ramp up the cost. So it's fixing this problem with the old service accounts can be difficult, but people have put a lot of effort into it and come up with some really useful solutions. Another option is this idea of elevating the permissions, that we simply bring the permissions up for the short period of time that they're needed, and then drop those permissions back down. We see this in use, particularly in Azure, with Microsoft's privileged identity management, which allows me to take my normal account, elevate it for a short period of time to some specific role that allows me to accomplish work. And then when that ends, I'm pulled back from that role and don't have that access. We could do similar things with service accounts. Microsoft refers to this as just-in-time or just-enough administration, right? Right now, it's really just in Azure, but Microsoft has stated that everything's done cloud first, and those changes should roll back onto prem at some point. So I would expect at some point we'll see something for elevating permissions. Again, not the answer for service accounts, but something to pay attention to when it comes to passwords. But elevating permissions, we could still do that with the proper tools, right? An IGA tool will allow us to do that, to raise permissions for a certain period of time, and then those drop back down. The benefit of this is if the account's compromised, the account doesn't have privilege, and so it can't do as much damage, right? So this would be useful for accounts that are seldom used. You have a service account that does a month-end close, right? So you bring it up at the last week of the month, and it's able to run, and then you drop it back down because it isn't going to run, and if somebody steals it. It's a difficult problem, but it's another solution for it. Not a good solution for legacy systems because we can't reach out and do the elevation within those legacy systems. But if you're looking at modern applications that have good governance online, those kinds of things, we can do this kind of work. And again, applies much more probably for privileged identity than for service accounts themselves. Right? But really, where we want to get to is a passwordless solution, token-based authentication, right? So we have opportunities to do this both on premises and in the cloud, Windows and Linux. A lot of different options here, and we'll take a look at some of those. One that I hadn't really thought of, that one of our bright people has brought up, was this idea using OAuth or OpenID Connect to do what Brandy refers to as authorization first. So forget about the authentication, and really with OAuth or OIDC, what we're able to do is say, I'm granting access to this system to do something on my behalf. And there's no authorization, your password's not used, or your biometric, or whatever it is that you use to authorize this, right? This is the way Spotify works, and Twitter on accounts, and all those kinds of things. That is just authorization, right? That you have the authorization to do that. I'm less concerned about who you are. Those are all token-based solutions, and they allow me to grant and remove that access for an account. We can use those in certain scenarios for tokenized accounts. The other option is to go with what are system-managed accounts. And so on premises, we have group managed service accounts, which were first managed service accounts, which were limited to a single server. Now they're group managed service accounts, so we can use them in a larger sense. We can use them across multiple servers. In the cloud, we have managed identities, which are similar to GMSAs, we'll talk more about these, in that the system manages the credentials. We never are aware of the credentials, so we can't be phished for them. The credential is automatically rolled by the system, so even if it were captured somehow, it would time out after time, that would not work, right? One of the things that we want to do, though, is get some central management here, right? So we can do things with tokens that are centrally managed. So there are tools out there that allow you to manage keys for your SSH connections to servers, which SSH connections can be run using certificate authentication. And there are tools such as Savient, one of our partners, has a cloud PAM solution where I log on as a user and I connect to those servers, but I never see the credential that connects. Again, this is not a service account, but the same thing can work where service accounts are authenticated into a system and then they retrieve their token for the proper authentication. This works in Azure natively with Key Vault, but there are also tools that allow you to do this. Tools, Hashemi Corp has a centrally managed certificate server for SSH logon that is used. So these tools exist to allow you to manage token solutions and provision and track those accounts, which is really a big part of the solution. We don't really know how many of those accounts are out there, right? Group managed service accounts. So managed service accounts, a little more detailed. Group managed service accounts, or you'll see them as lowercase g MSA. Similar to a computer account in Windows. So when we join a computer to the domain, the computer gets a token, or certificate essentially, a token for authentication to the domain, and that token gets rolled over time. We never see it, we never have to deal with it. In the rare occasion, we'll have a trust broken with a computer in a Windows domain, and that means that this account update process has broken, and you simply rejoin it to the domain with the proper credentials, and you'll get that process working again. We see a lot fewer of those kind of trust failures than we used to 30 years ago or whatever it was, right? So we never know them, we can't be phished, any of those things. And we can put restrictions on where the account may run. So we can say, well, this account, it can only run on these 5 servers, or only on these 2 servers because it's in support of a clustered solution, something along those ways. So managed service accounts really allow us to just get rid of the password, switch to a token solution that is managed by the system. Managed identities in Azure are kind of a similar thing. They're managed in a managed account in the cloud, but there's 2 types of them, which are useful for us. They require that we use AD authentication to make these work, but the 2 types are the system assigned and the user assigned. So system assigned is just a managed identity that's attached to a service in Azure, right? I create an application, I've got a service attached to that. When that service ends, that account goes away. I don't even have to manage it, it's just taken care of by the system. You can also create these user-assigned managed identities, and these are really useful for your applications where normally you would use a service account, but you'd put that service account in the application, and somehow you'd provide the credentials for it, the password for it, that's never ever going to change, that's sitting in the application. Now, hopefully you've encrypted that password or done something else to protect it. But what managed identities let you do is create an identity that goes into your application that then is able to retrieve its credentials from Key Vault, from Microsoft's Key Vault, Azure's Key Vault, and use that credential. Again, you never see it, no one can phish it, and it gets rotated over time. So really well protected identities. And we should think about moving to those identities. So the type of account that you look to move a service account to is really dependent on what you're using them for. And we've kind of grouped these into 4 big buckets here. So our on-premise service accounts, the classic password-based service accounts that run you know, IIS or task scheduler or any of those things, those get moved to group managed service accounts. In almost all cases, we can make those changes. There's a couple where we can't, and we'll talk about those. Azure Service Principals were the start of managed identities. Now we have managed identities, and so we should be moving those service principals over to Azure Managed Identities, or stop using service principals and use the managed identities. It's just much cleaner. One of the use cases we don't think about very often, and this one I couldn't for the life of me remember at 4 o'clock this morning, was using email, particularly in automation. And this has, there's a lot of people who use service accounts simply to have an email mailbox that multiple people can use. Well, now there are this concept of shared mailboxes in Exchange Online, don't require a license, easy to set up for multiple users, and really should be used for this, because then you don't require this service account that's sitting out there with a password waiting to be used, right? Now, for the ones that we can't move to a group managed service account or a managed identity or a shared mailbox, we have to take another approach. We're going to have some older, right, legacy, air quotes, legacy stuff that just will not work with this. And one of the cases is these hybrid service accounts. If I take a service and move it up to Azure, but I still need to access that service from on-premises or from Azure back to on-premises, or either of those, there's kind of this blood-brain barrier between the two, right? I can't authenticate in Azure with an on-prem account, and I can't authenticate on-prem with an Azure account for these service type things. So what we do is we'll stick with the old service account, which we can use the password. The password can get synced up to Azure and still be used in Azure, and it'll be able to authenticate back. And what we do for those is what Microsoft calls authentication silos. And what those are is a group policy object that does exactly what the group managed service accounts do in limiting where we can run that service account. So we can't protect it beyond putting the eggs all in one basket, right? Managing that password, maybe putting it under a PAM solution or PIM solution. But by using GPOs to restrict the access, then we're able to reduce the danger of that account being compromised. If it's compromised, still can't be used off the specific servers, so we reduce the risk of lateral movement within the organization, whether that's on premises or in the cloud. But we really don't group policy objects. So I'm sorry, that we do want to watch for lateral movement, but this solution, I'm sorry, is really only for the on-prem accounts, the service accounts that we can't move because we've got some legacy software that requires that, right? So let's talk about some of the things that we've learned working with this and some of the things that you want to look for if you're digging into this, right? Discovery is a problem. It's probably the biggest issue, is determining where those accounts, as we said, nobody really knows how many we've got, right? Could be 3 to 1, could be less, could be more. But so you just have to dig into the data, and it's going to depend how people have organized their domains, whether they've put service accounts in a separate OU, whether they've got a naming convention, whether they use the account type settings for it, and how rigorous they've been about maintaining that. It really becomes a process of elimination. In some cases, we've gone in and just pulled all the users out of all the domains and tried to sort through them. And then you have to find who owns that account, right? Who's responsible for that account, and associate them with it somehow so that you're able to manage it. And if you want to move to a different type of account, you have to work with those people to actually make that move. And in many cases, you go to those people and they'll say, well, I don't know where that account's being used. I have no idea what's up with it. And you can't just start shutting stuff off and waiting for people to scream, right? That never works in IT. So we have to prove the usage. We'll take a look at how we can do that. Another way to get around some of this work is deal with partners. Get some help, leverage that experience. We've got our partner, Phycotic, is digging into this service account space with lifecycle management, and their secret service product, we'll talk about in a minute, helps do some of that work for you. So the discovery, right, as I said, client might have a naming convention, might put them in particular OUs, or has object attributes that they've set. Of course, if somebody's got a robust identity and access management platform, then they can probably tell you what all the accounts are that are people accounts, those belly button accounts, because they're managing them. IAM tends not as much to do the service accounts, and that's where our gap is. So again, back to this process of elimination. Okay, here's 60,000 accounts. Okay, I've got 20,000 of them in my IAM tool, well, the other 40 are the ones I need to deal with. Right? And then there are third-party discovery tools that help. So tools that use remote management and WMI to go out and discover these accounts that are being used. Right. This phycotic privilege account discovery tool does that. But there are ways that we can gather this data with tools that Microsoft provides. And WEF is a big part of that, right? So Windows event forwarding is what WEF is. And what this allows us to do is to take the Windows events from our servers within the organization and collect those events in a central location. Now, this can be a lot of data, so you have to be aware of that. But what we want to do is knock down that data to the things that we actually care about. So we go out and collect all of the WEF data from all of our servers into a Windows event collection server. That gets brought over to a SQL database where we're able to run some BI against it and down select the accounts that we really care about, right? Where we want to work on this account, where's it logging on? When we talk to the owner, the presumptive owner of that account, they tell us, oh, we don't know what it's doing, and say, well, this is what it's doing. It's running on this server. It logged on 3 times in the last month, and this is where we see it going, right? And so now we need to move this because it's running this service. We can run it to change it to this type of account and help them do that, and also bring it under management, we would hope, at the same time, right? We can also use WEF with Azure Log Analytics up in the cloud, which gives us a lot more capability, right? So instead of collecting it on the WEF server, we put the agents on the on-premises, collect those up. If we've got VMs running in the cloud, we push their data to Log Analytics. Same deal, pump it into SQL and run our tools against it to bring those up. So these are just some of the things that we've put together as we've been doing this work. Not all of it. Sarah, who's on the call, has much more information about that. But one of our partners, phycotic, as I said, is working in this space. Their secret server will discover and manage those service accounts. Can manage those accounts out on the boxes. It'll discover those accounts and new password management for them. Within the domain, it's just kind of table stakes, just happens, right? So those MS service accounts, whether they're services or running an IIS pool or the task scheduler, they'll just manage those passwords, rotate them on the basis, and people can go get them if they need them for some reason, right? And one of the things that Secret Server really adds here is this ability to attach dependencies. So understanding that this service account, if I rotate it, I need to restart this. I also need to go restart a couple of other dependencies. And so it digs through, and that's its WinRM piece, that it goes in and finds all those things. And it can work cross-platform, right? The ability to do the work within Windows is really straightforward. When you start looking at other systems, then you have to bring in some scripts and things. Maybe you want to rotate passwords that are stored in a database for access to some services, right? Service account standard stuff. Or maybe it's in a application running on a Linux server that the domain doesn't know how to talk to. And so we can do those cross-platform things with that. So that's a good question, good time for it. What's the benefit? I got a question here. What's the benefit to use a solution such as Secret Server for service accounts versus turning them into GMSAs? Well, the GMSAs are, you have to do the work, right? You have to stop using the service account. You have to create the group managed service account. You have to install that on the server. You have to do all of that work. And that's it's difficult, it's time consuming, and you're going to find pushback from people, right? So this is an option. If that's too big a hill, then there are tools that'll help you secure these without moving to those. Now, I would suggest, and I do later, suggest that what you do is stop using old service accounts, right? If that's the very least you can do, then just stop using the password-based service accounts and move to GMSAs as you create new ones, as you rotate servers. And this is, it's a standard ROI. You got to look and say, okay, here's an application that uses a service account. We're going to move to a different thing in 2 years. So, okay, just protect that. And when you roll off it, you roll off it, right? But and one of the other things, one of the benefits here, and Phycotic, we're talking to them about it, they're looking into how they manage the group managed service accounts as well. But this account lifecycle management is a second piece from Phycotic that works with Secret Server to grab these accounts and wherever they're used, manage them. And so we can have owners, and we can come back and ask owners if they still need the account, if we should get rid of it, right? And in bold here, I have manage deprovisioning, because that's the big thing, right? We've all probably got service accounts sitting around in our domain that are no longer used, but the password's been set to never expire. They've got high rights, all those kinds of things. You got to get rid of them, right? Deprovisioning is the big thing. And auditing. So you're able to go back and say, hey, this is what we're doing with service accounts. We used to have this many. We've reduced it to that. Here are the people who own them, all those kind of things. So the tools help, but you don't need them, right? If you really want to just move to a better solution in the platform, a group managed service or a managed identity, then you can do that. But these tools are out there to help you. And we found some gaps, so we've built some stuff on our own, but it doesn't tie into this. And there's other players out there. Phycotic is certainly not the only person in the PIM-PAM space. We were at Gartner, well over a year ago, because nobody's gone anywhere. And we counted 28 PAM vendors at Gartner. So there's plenty of people in this space, right? And that's the thing. What if I can't get rid of these service accounts? What if I can't move to GMSA for some reason, or can't move to managed identity? Maybe whatever the reason is, there's 100 different reasons, right? So with all that legacy, our hybrid solutions, we continue using the passwords, but limit the reach, right? So do just what GMSAs do, reduce the reach of it. So our authentication silos that use GPO to limit that access. Require the tokenized auth to retrieve privileged passwords. So use the managed identity in your applications in Azure and go get the key from the key vault, so you don't have to put it in your application. You can use RPAs that rotate passwords, right? Robotic process automation that we used to call screen scraping in the 80s, but we can do that and reach out and rotate the passwords. Again, those are complex systems, because you could have one server that is using that service account who happens to be down when you do the rotate. And you've got to be aware that that needs to be updated, or you're going to have failures in it. So these are problematic. Moving to system managed things are just a better solution. But there's other things to do, right? Modern auth, OAuth, and OpenID, as we talked about. And regardless, you got to get some governance on it. You got to know what you've got, right? The big thing is not knowing what's out there. So policies, it doesn't have to be governance, doesn't need to be a big governance solution, but it needs to be basic policies that this is how you go about creating an account. We need to have 2 owners for it. Who's the owner? Who's the fallback owner? Those kinds of things. Create policies that help you govern, right? With a small g, govern those service accounts, just as you do your regular user accounts and your privileged accounts. So how do we get there? Well, like I said, build a process to create and manage those new types of accounts. The managed service accounts, the managed identities, the tokenized accounts. And then as soon as you can, stop creating those old service accounts. If you're trying to migrate off those service accounts and you keep creating new ones, you'll never get out from underneath it, right? When you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Right? So bring those current service accounts under management, go out, discover the accounts, whether you do it through your own WMI scripts, whether you do it through trolling through the through the domains into an Excel spreadsheet that take forever to load, whatever. Convert to a vault or PAM solution. Again, could be a stopgap measure, may not be the ultimate end, but get you a bit more secure in these things. Use the tokenized accounts, really important. Make sure you're not using service accounts for external access, right? So whether you're coming in through conditional access or some VPN or other solution, throw MFA on top of those things and make sure that you stop using service accounts for external access, because you probably don't have MFA on them because it doesn't work, right? So stop people from using those to come into the organization, and that will provide an immediate upgrade in your security. Is make sure that these accounts that do not use multi-factor are not being used to transition from outside the organization into the organization. And limit the blast radius. So if you have to stick with the other ones, make sure you lock down with whatever mechanism to assure that that is that we restrict where that can be used. So authentication silos as your last stop if you can't get rid of those accounts. And then of course, like everything in the world, that you do all this stuff and you profit, right? But that's my only joke for this. So that's as much time as I had. I had a little 45 minutes. I went a little early, went a little quick, didn't see too many questions. If there's any other questions you want to talk about this or anything, and if this is something that interests you, we're doing this work. If you'd like to talk about it and the experiences we've had in more depth, just reach out to us. We'd be happy to speak with you. And thanks for joining the webinar. I know you get lots of invitations. So thanks for joining. I hope this was a little bit different, less driven to a particular solution, but get you thinking about how you can up-level your security for these accounts. So have a good day.